Lastly, I am very much for American energy. I think that if we have some people working on this right now who believe that with just a handful of practical steps, you could dramatically accelerate American energy development. If you keep $400 or $500 billion at home annually, instead of sending it to Saudi Arabia or Venezuela or what have you, the number of jobs that creates and the degree to which that improves national security is dramatic. So those are the steps I'd take to create jobs. Yes, sir.
I'm going to be a little bit less gentle than the crowd has been so far.
Oh, don't do that. I didn't want to. Go ahead.
Well, as you know, the Tea Party group is, I mean, I'm sure the majority of the folks in this room are probably Republican. However, not 100%. We actually speak to a larger audience than just the Republican audience. And some of the more, let's say, libertarian leaning folks would question some prior actions, and they get annoyed with politicians that put party over the country or something like that. And with that preface, can you explain New York 23 to me?
Sure, absolutely. For those of you who don't know, New York 23 was a special election in which the Republicans nominated a liberal Republican named Scarzafava. I have a very firm rule. I have been actively working to build the Republican Party since the summer of 1960. I was an active Georgia Republican when the entire Georgia Republican Party was this side of the room. And my rule is, if you become the Republican nominee, I support you. Now, I just want to say to my Tea Party friends, everybody who got mad in Nevada and got mad in Delaware last year because moderate Republicans did not support the Tea Party candidate, that's what happens. I mean, you either have a rule that says everybody gets to fight it out, and New York 23 was a mess. I understand that, and people jump up and say, well, she wasn't really the nominee because of this and that. The state party said she was the nominee. The Congressional Campaign Committee said she was the nominee. The folks who nominated her said she was the nominee. Yes, it was a mess. Yes, there was a conservative candidate. New York State is a unique state that has a conservative party. But my position is I am for the Republican nominee, and the reason's practical. You're trying to govern 305 million people. There are 513,000 elected officials in the United States. 435 House members, 100 senators. If I get in the business of saying, well, maybe I'll support you if you meet my litmus test, I can't build a majority. Now, the reason you want to build a majority in the House and Senate is simple. The difference between Boehner and Pelosi is, in my judgment, and again, this is important for you to think about. The difference between Boehner and Pelosi is worth 5 moderates. Yeah, you're not going to like them. And by the way, you might not be able to win in Vermont. So if I have to take somebody who's not exactly who our perfect candidate is, but as a result I've got a majority, this is how I got to be Speaker. This is how I kept the speakership. Nobody had won re-election in a majority since 1928. We won in 1996, and the people we protected the most were the moderates. You know why? They had the worst districts. I mean, if I've got some right-winger out here in a 96% Republican district, I don't exactly have to worry about them, unless they're really idiotic and they lose the primary. But if I've got somebody over here who's fighting uphill every year, and they're always starting 20 points behind, I better try to figure out what gets them reelected. And so trying to govern a country this size is kind of, I'll give you one last example, because it's not just ideology. If we're going to be a majority, we're going to be inclusive. I always tell people, outreach is when 5 white guys hold a meeting and call you. Inclusion is when you're in the meeting. So Callista and I recently were in Los Angeles, and we're in a meeting with Korean Americans. There are 600,000 Korean Americans in Los Angeles. Okay? Patriotic, hardworking, 6 television cameras, 6 different Korean stations, mostly cable, but still, I mean, if you go to our website, you'll see articles in Korean from the local newspapers. Now, I'm for English as the official language of government. I don't mind saying that in every group. But I'll tell you this. But here's the key. If we're competitive with Asian Americans, and we're competitive with Latino Americans, and we're competitive with African Americans, and we're competitive with Native Americans, California's in play. I mean, all of a sudden you've taken away part of the base of the Democratic Party. And if you watched the election result in New York yesterday, you know, I mean, if you can win Schumer's seat, Reagan carried more states against Jimmy Carter than FDR carried against Herbert Hoover. So, you know, I'm an optimist, but I'll take some heat for this. I understood it at the time. But I also used to take heat from people in the moderate wing because I supported Ron Paul. You know, he was the Republican nominee. Well, if you're in, the Massachusetts Republican Party, Ron Paul isn't always exactly your cup of tea. But that's how we build a majority, and I want to keep a majority. Yes, ma'am.
Can I say it next to you for a second?
Sure.
I'm milking this. Okay. If you've taken a Constitution class or a history class in the last 2 years, would you raise your hand, please?
Cool.
If you've gone to Washington, D.C. for any of the big 4 events, raise your hands, please. If you've gone for at least one of the big events, would you raise your hand, please? What do you need us to do if you're elected? We need to stay engaged. What do you need us to do? And what are your thoughts on the Tea Party movement?
Well, first of all, the Tea Party movement's been very healthy for the country. I think it would, come on back up, we'll get a picture. Okay. I want to start with where you started, which is I think to the degree you can go out, for example, and ensure that schools teach the Declaration of Independence, that they teach the Constitution, that in high school they start looking at the Federalist Papers. And that would include this tax-paid universities and colleges. I mean, it strikes me we need a whole program of reorienting Americans back to being American. That's part one. 2, it's important to remember, as I said a while ago, while we think Washington, because it's the central organizing part of our national media system, and it currently has huge power, in the long run, we want to decentralize America back, which means you all have thousands of local officials to think about. There's a town here, near here, where the Tea Party won every municipal election. And that's very healthy because all of a sudden you have to actually solve the problems, not just complain about them. And so think about all the local elections, et cetera. In addition, we're going to need much more voluntary activity. We're not going to solve the problem of the hardcore unemployed just by government. We're going to need churches to be engaged. We're going to need philanthropies to be engaged. We're going to need volunteers to be engaged. So things to do. Finally, and I don't quite know how we'll do this yet. Nobody's ever fully done this, but we have, because of the emerging social media, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or you name it, Google+, we're going to have an ability to work together in ways nobody's ever dreamed of. And so I really want to think about, I'm trying to think through not just what are campaigns like, but what is citizenship like. I think a great mistake that Obama made, because he was the first great pioneer of doing this in a huge way. He had an enormous potential army the day after the election. But see, he told them to be for him. And so on election night, they won. And they went home and they said, we know he'll solve it, we don't have to worry about it. Now, there's a problem for him, and it'll be a problem for me, and that is, if you really keep people engaged, they tell you what they think. And had Obama actually listened to the people who were for him, I don't think he would have passed. He certainly would not have passed the original stimulus without anybody reading it, because his own base wouldn't have been for it. So the problem is, you have to get into a brand new relationship. And this is a good thing to close on, because you ask a core question about the future of America. We have it in our power to begin to think through the equivalent of the old-time New England town hall meeting for the whole country. We recently did a conference call, which Adam put together, after the president's speech. I don't know if any of you were actually on this call or not, but after the president's speech, we sent out a note to a lot of our supporters, and we had a conference call. Were you on it? Oh, yeah. We had 989 people call in at halftime of the Green Bay game to be involved in a conference call to talk about it and ask questions and so forth. Now, what I eventually want to get to is a dramatically more sophisticated model. So we're really serious about, what are your ideas about the executive orders? What are your ideas for Team 10 on implementation? What things have we not, what have we not even thought about yet? One of the things that's popping up, for example, is Agenda 21, which is not something I even knew about until we did a couple of conference calls. That's probably going to be one of the very first executive orders, is to cease all federal funding of any kind of activity that relates to the United Nations Agenda 21. But my point is that we want to find ways that with a reasonable amount of time, people can stay involved and stay informed, because you have to be able to live your life and be a citizen simultaneously. And so people have to go to work, or they have to go to school, they have to do a lot of things, have to take care of their parents if they're ill. But so we're going to work on exactly what you ask about and try to find models that we together stay informed all the way through this process. And then frankly, if we succeed, whoever follows me will need the same kind of team building, the same kind of relationship to actually create a citizen community movement across the whole country using the internet. And I think we're supposed to have gone for an hour, and so what I'd like to do is Clifton and I'll be here if you'd like to take pictures. We'd love to get to meet each of you personally. It is a great thrill to us to be able to be out here. Thank you, both of you, for having helped organize this. Thank you. Thank you.